Stray dog finds baby left by Tycoon. What he does next will break your heart. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. Richard Bennett, a millionaire businessman with a spotless reputation, at least on the surface. Wearing a perfectly pressed suit, a navy blue tie and holding a cup of imported coffee, Richard descended the white marble staircase with the confidence of a man who believed the world was his to command. His wife, Claire Bennett, an elegant woman with a cold gaze and a fake smile, flipped through a society magazine in the main living room. "Heading to the office this early?" she asked without looking up. "I've got a meeting with the Swiss investors." "Don't wait up for dinner," Richard replied, planting a shallow kiss on her cheek. But the truth was far different. A few miles away, in a modest neighborhood on the east side of town, Emily Harper, a 22-year-old with an angelic face and crystal-clear eyes, was preparing breakfast in her tiny one-bedroom apartment. Her apron was stained with paint. She was an art student, but she wasn't going to class that day. That day, she was waiting for Richard. Emily had met Richard by chance when she took a temp job as a receptionist at Bennett Enterprises. What started as stolen glances ended with Richard making her an indecent proposal. Secret meetings in exchange for funding her art career and paying for her younger brother's medical treatment. At first, Emily resisted, but need is a cruel force, and her morals crumbled under the weight of her brother's illness and Richard's sweet promises. "This is just between us. No one can ever know, Emily," he whispered once, sliding an envelope of cash across the table in the hotel room where they met. Emily, naive but not foolish, had started to fall for him, and when the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, her world collapsed like a house of cards. "Richard, I'm pregnant," she told him, her voice trembling. One rainy afternoon in the cafe where they met in secret. He said nothing for several seconds. Then, with a steely gaze and a controlled voice, he snapped, "That can't be. What you're carrying doesn't exist." Emily looked at him, her eyes wet, hoping for a word of comfort, a shred of humanity. But all she got was a brutal command: "Disappear. No one can know that child is mine." He stood and left, leaving her alone with a cold cup of coffee, a growing belly, and a love that was quickly turning into fear. A full moon hung like a silent witness over the bare trees of Shady Grove, casting pale light on the empty road. The roar of an engine broke the absolute silence as a sleek black luxury car moved slowly, as if its driver hesitated at every mile. Behind the wheel, Richard Bennett clenched his teeth. His knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. The back seat was empty, almost. On the leather upholstery lay a dark duffel bag, tightly zipped, from which a faint, barely audible whimper escaped. "I don't have a choice," he muttered through gritted teeth, his voice cracking with an emotion he refused to acknowledge. It had been just 3 days since Emily Harper gave birth in secret at a private clinic on the outskirts of Pinewood Valley. Richard had arranged everything: a fake identity, a bribed doctor, and a nurse sworn to silence. The baby was born healthy, with clear eyes like its mother's. But to Richard, that child was a threat, a permanent stain on his flawless image. He couldn't let a scandal drag him into ruin. "I'm sorry," he whispered without looking back, as he stopped the car on a lonely curve in the forest. He opened the back door. The baby's faint cry pierced the silence of the night, like a heavenly lament. Richard grabbed the bag with trembling hands. For a second, he hesitated. His cold blue eyes met the red, writhing face of the child, wrapped in thin blankets. "You were never supposed to exist. You're not part of my world," he whispered, more to himself than to the baby. He walked a few steps into the forest, crunching dry leaves under his Italian shoes. He chose a secluded spot among dense bushes and a fallen log. Kneeling with effort, he set the bag on the ground and pushed it gently between the branches. The baby's cries grew muffled, then almost silent. Richard stood quickly, as if the act had burned his skin. He hurried back to the car, slamming the door and starting the engine with force. His breathing was ragged, his face sweaty, his heart racing. In the rearview mirror, he saw only darkness. As the car vanished down the lonely road, a chilly breeze swept through the trees, like a whisper from fate that hadn't yet spoken its final word. The early morning wrapped Pinewood Valley in a thick, heavy silence. While the city's lights flickered in the distance, in the shadows of the industrial district, a forgotten creature stirred, sensing something unusual. It was Max, a scruffy mutt with grayish fur and pointed ears. his back marked with old scars. No Ono knew his story. Some said he'd been abandoned by a wealthy family when he got too old. Others claimed he escaped a cruel breeder. What was certain was that Max lived among the dumpsters, slept under a rusty old structure, and roamed the city for scraps of food and fleeting moments of kindness. That night, or rather that early morning, Max rose from his sleep with a restless twitch. His senses, sharpened by survival, caught something odd. His nose picked up a scent that didn't belong. Human milk, fresh sweat, the sharp tang of fear, and something softer, more fragile. Life. New life. His body reacted before his mind could process it. He took off at a trot, heading down the concrete slope connecting the industrial zone to Shady Grove. He moved quickly, guided only by his nose and a sixth sense that street dogs develop to survive. As he entered the forest, the air grew colder. Twigs snapped under his paws. Max stopped suddenly. Something made him turn his head to the right. A faint whisper. No, a whimper. He sped up. His heart pounded. At last, behind a tangled bush among dry leaves and damp branches, he saw a duffel bag. He approached cautiously, sniffing around. The scent was unmistakable. There was a baby inside. Max let out a low whine, as if trying not to scare whatever was in there. He nudged the bag with his snout and began tearing at the fabric with his teeth, pulling carefully until he opened a gap wide enough to see the tiny red face of a baby trembling with cold. Max whimpered louder, licked the baby's forehead gently, and then curled up beside it. His thin but warm body became a blanket. His breathing filled the air with a steady rhythm. His eyes, used to expecting nothing, now shone with something new, purpose. He didn't move. He didn't leave. He stayed by the baby, watching the darkness, defying the cold, waiting for something, someone. The early morning pressed on relentlessly, covering Shady Grove with a thick blanket of icy fog. The treetops swayed in a timid breeze, and the silence was broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. In this forgotten corner of the world, two beings who never should have met shared the warmth of an unexpected promise, a stray dog and an abandoned newborn. Max, still except for the faint rise and fall of his chest, stayed curled against the tiny body of the baby. His eyes remained open, alert, like those of a guardian on the edge of death. The baby, who had been crying more than breathing hours before, now slept, its little mouth slightly open, its tiny fingers instinctively clutching Max's drooping ear. Max knew they couldn't stay there. The cold would worsen. Dawn was still far off. He stood slowly, turning his body carefully, and grabbed the bag with his teeth, holding it by a fold of fabric with almost human gentleness. He took a few steps, paused, and sniffed the air. He didn't know where to go or how, but he had to move. He had to find help. He dragged the bag along the uneven path, his paws sinking into the damp earth. Every few steps he stopped, letting out a short, deep bark, as if hoping someone, anyone, would hear. Then he resumed his march. The baby's weight wasn't heavy, but the effort was immense. Max hadn't eaten in hours. His back legs trembled. His snout burned from the rough fabric, but his will pushed him forward. Something inside him, something new, told him this life in his jaws was worth more than 1,000 that had ignored him. He crossed a stream. He climbed a rocky slope. At one point, he stumbled and fell to his side. The baby whimpered. Max scrambled up, panting, desperate, licking the child's face to ensure it was still breathing. And he barked, this time with all his strength. That sharp, insistent bark tore through the forest's veil. It was a call for a miracle. The first glow of dawn barely touched the rooftops of Pinewood Valley when Margaret Foster, a 64-year-old widow, stepped out of her house in a wool coat, rubber boots, and a bag full of kibble. As she did every morning, she crossed the old brick street to feed the stray cats living under the steps of the town library. "Come on, my little ones. Where are you?" she murmured sweetly, pouring food into plastic bowls as meows gathered like a street symphony. Then she heard it. A bark. Not one of the neighborhood dogs. It was rougher, deeper, desperate. Another bark, then another. Margaret turned her head. The sound came from the edge of Shady Grove, where the underbrush met abandoned industrial buildings. Her heart skipped a beat. That area was dangerous, lonely, and no sensible person ventured there at dawn. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice shaky. She took a few steps forward. The barking repeated, and then she saw it. A canine figure emerged from the bushes, dirty, limping, eyes wide with effort. In its mouth it dragged what looked like an old mud-stained bag covered in twigs. When it got within a few feet of her, it dropped the bundle and barked loudly, as if it knew she was the only human who could understand. "Oh my God," Margaret gasped, dropping her bag of kibble. She approached cautiously. When she opened the bag with trembling hands, her breath stopped. A baby, wrapped in soaked blankets, skin pale, but lips still moving faintly. It was alive. "Good heavens! It's alive!" she shouted, pulling her phone from her pocket with shaking fingers. She dialed 911 urgently, explaining through tears what she saw. The dog edged closer, nudging the baby's face with its snout as if to say, "I kept it safe. Now it's your turn." Margaret began to cry. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now, you're safe." The 911 operator tried to keep her calm as she described the scene. Within 5 minutes, a siren approached. Max, though exhausted, stayed by the baby's side, not moving a muscle. When the paramedics arrived, Margaret could barely stammer, It was this dog. He brought it to me. He saved it." The wail of the siren cut through the air like a metallic cry as the ambulance, escorted by a police car, screeched to a halt by the curb. 2 paramedics jumped out, alerted by the urgent call. Their faces showed a mix of professional tension and disbelief as they saw an older woman with grey hair in a messy bun kneeling in the grass with a baby in her arms, and a stray dog standing firmly by her side. "Here, the baby's here," Margaret Foster shouted, waving her arm desperately. The paramedics rushed over. One, David Larson, about 30, with a sharp face and intense green eyes, knelt quickly, touching the baby with gloved hands. The other, Mike Sullivan, prepared a stretcher. "It's alive, but it's got hypothermia. We need to warm it up now," David ordered, wrapping the baby in a thermal blanket and checking vital signs with focus. Margaret, trembling, tried to explain, "That dog brought it. I don't know how, but he dragged it from the woods. It was alone, just with him." Max, still unmoving, stood firm beside the baby, sniffing the air, alert to every movement. When the paramedics lifted the child to place it in the ambulance, the dog stepped forward and let out a short bark, as if saying, "I'm coming too." "What about the dog?" Mike asked, frowning. "I don't know, but he hasn't left the baby's side," Margaret replied, her eyes teary. David glanced at the dog for a moment. There was something in its gaze. Determination, loyalty, something no training could teach. "Let him come," he said, opening the ambulance's back door. "You sure?" Mike asked. "Absolutely." Max jumped into the vehicle without hesitation, settling next to the makeshift incubator where they placed the baby. He didn't bark. He didn't fidget. He just watched, vigilant. As the ambulance sped off with the siren's echo, Margaret stood alone in the street, watching the scene as if she'd just witnessed a divine act. In her chest, something stirred. It wasn't fear. It was an old, forgotten feeling. Hope. The doors of Mercy General Hospital swung wide open as the ambulance pulled up to the emergency room. Doctors and nurses rushed out, alerted by the unusual report, a newborn found in extreme conditions, brought by a stray dog. "Code Amber in room 1. A nurse in white shouted as David Larson exited the ambulance with the baby wrapped in thermal blankets. Max hopped out right behind him, moving through the cold lights and hurried voices. No one dared stop him. His walk was steady, dignified as if he understood the gravity of the moment. A resident tried to block him, but David stopped them with a gesture. "Let him be. He got this far. There's a reason." In the stabilization room, 3 doctors worked quickly. Monitors, oxygen, IV fluids. The baby's skin, still pale, began to warm. Its cry was weak but clear. Max watched from a corner, sitting quietly, tongue out, eyes fixed on the stretcher. Each time the baby whimpered, Max tilted his head as if to comfort it. The nurses couldn't help but look at him with warmth. "How'd you say they found it?" one asked David. "An older lady found it near the woods, but it wasn't alone. That dog dragged it there, kept it warm, saved its life." Meanwhile, outside the hospital, a security camera caught the ambulance's arrival. Within minutes, a young local news reporter, Ethan Brooks, got an unusual tip from his emergency contact. "A dog saving a baby? For real? They're treating it now. Trust me, Ethan, this story's gold." Ethan didn't hesitate. Within an hour, the hospital was swarmed with cameras, microphones, and onlookers. Images of the dog sitting outside the pediatric ward went viral. Twitter, Instagram, morning news shows. Headlines popped up everywhere. A hero on four legs, furry miracle in Pinewood Valley, the dog that defied death. Inside the hospital, doctors smiled quietly at the news. Max was now lying down, head between his paws, finally resting. But even at rest, his eyes stayed half open, watching. The news hit the offices of Bennett Enterprises like wildfire, where the scent of gourmet coffee and the gleam of crystal couldn't hide the growing tension. On the lobby's main screen, the words, "Hero dog saves abandoned newborn," looped endlessly, paired with an image of a noble-looking dog and a baby wrapped in blankets. Richard Bennett, sitting in his corner office, sipped whiskey on the rocks, despite it not yet being noon. He wore an immaculate light grey suit, but his hands trembled slightly. He hadn't spoken in hours. Across from him, his personal assistant, Sarah Coleman, read a press report with a shaky voice. "They say the baby was found near Shady Grove, abandoned in a bag. The police are already investigating, Richard." "This has nothing to do with me," he snapped, not meeting her eyes, his jaw tight. "The hospital released a photo of the baby." "It looks like you," Sarah said, her voice cold with a hint of fear. Richard stood abruptly, spilling his glass. His reflection in the window showed a man cornered, not by an enemy but by his own choices. "Find the doctor who handled that birth now." But it was too late. Across town, in a small office at the Department of Child Services, Detective Laura Mitchell, a meticulous woman with a calm demeanor, studied the evidence carefully. They'd collected fibers from the bag, cross-referenced medical records, and started analyzing traffic cameras from the industrial area. And there it was, footage from the night before, showing a luxury car leaving the woods. Zoom in, closer, more. The license plate, the model, the color, all pointed to one name, Richard Bennett. The detective pursed her lips. She'd heard rumors before, but now she had something solid. She called the prosecutor's office immediately. A judge was summoned. Search warrants were issued. Hours later, authorities arrived at Bennett Enterprises with a court order. Richard tried to resist. He shouted. He called his lawyer. But when Detective Laura Mitchell flashed her badge in his face, his arrogance crumbled. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "you're under arrest for attempted murder and aggravated child abandonment. You have the right to remain silent." The boardroom fell silent. Sarah dropped her folder. An executive muttered a curse. Outside the glass, reporters were already gathering, broadcasting the scene live. Hours later, DNA tests confirmed the baby was Richard's biological child, and the world, which once applauded his empire, now saw him as a monster in a tie. The scandal's echo engulfed Pinewood Valley like a storm no one could ignore. Newspaper front pages showed Richard Bennett, escorted by police, hands cuffed, eyes sunken. The untouchable Tycoon had fallen. With him fell the mask of perfection he'd worn for years to hide his moral rot. Meanwhile, in a softly lit room at Mercy General Hospital, Emily Harper held her child for the first time. Her fingers trembled as they touched the baby's soft, almost unreal skin. A nurse beside her watched in silence, as if witnessing a reunion of broken souls. Emily's hair was pulled back messily, her face tired but resolute. She'd returned after seeing the news. No one forced her. She came on her own, an envelope in hand and her heart in her throat. "I'm the mother," she said quietly at the hospital reception. Social workers questioned her. Police listened. The courts reviewed documents, letters, tests. There was no doubt. Emily had been coerced, manipulated, silenced. Her choice to give birth in secret, to disappear, wasn't cowardly. It was desperate. At the preliminary hearing, Judge Robert Hayes, a stern-looking man, listened to every side in silence. He reviewed the baby's photos, the reports, the footage of the dog dragging the bag. Then he looked at Emily. "Ms. Harper, what do you seek by coming back?" She took a deep breath, hands clasped over her chest. "A second chance. I want to raise my child, Jess, with dignity." The judge narrowed his eyes. He wasn't a man of rash decisions, but he saw in this woman the raw vulnerability of someone who'd lived in darkness and chosen to step into the light. "The court grants you temporary custody of the minor under supervision. You must attend family therapy, submit to regular visits, and prove you can provide a stable environment. This decision will be reviewed in 6 months." Emily couldn't hold back her tears. She clutched her child to her chest. as if shielding it from all the pain she already knew too well. From the back of the courtroom, Max, the dog, watched the scene, lying by the door. Yes, he'd been allowed inside. Everyone there knew. Without him, none of this would have been possible. Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me. Months passed as if time had decided to give the wounds a break. Spring began to paint Pinewood Valley's trees with soft shades of green and white, and the days finally seemed to stop bleeding. In a small wooden house with floral curtains and the scent of freshly baked bread, Emily Harper tucked a blanket over her child, now officially named Grace Harper, as sunlight streamed through the window, lighting up her rosy cheeks. The girl slept peacefully, clutching a small stuffed toy. On the floor by the crib, Max, the old street hero, slept too, stretched out on his side, snout resting on his paw, but always with one ear perked at the slightest sound. He no longer roamed the streets for scraps. Now he had a home, a name, a medal around his neck engraved with the Furry Guardian. Emily had officially adopted him weeks after the hearing. When she signed the papers, the shelter worker said, "Funny thing, you're not the first to adopt him. He chose you long before." Their routine was simple. In the mornings, Emily painted while Grace played on a rug, and Max watched out the window. In the afternoons, they walked around the neighborhood, Max trotting proudly, greeted by kids like an old friend. "There goes the dog who saved the baby," they shouted from their bikes. Max's story had become a legend. TV stations came to interview him. Kids' shows made cartoons based on him. But for Emily, it wasn't about fame. It was the quiet sweetness of a home free of fear. One calm afternoon, as Grace slept in her crib and Max snored softly beside her, Emily sat on the porch with a cup of tea and looked at the sky. A gentle breeze stirred her hair and light dress. "Thank you," she murmured, unsure if she was speaking to God, fate, or Max. In that moment, everything felt at peace. The nightmare was over, but the scars remained, not as wounds, but as marks telling a story of survival. And in the heart of Pinewood Valley, amid blooming flowers and promises once broken, a family was born again, not by blood, but by love. A year later, Shady Grove breathed calmly. The trees that once hid an unforgivable crime now swayed in the breeze as if guarding what was born there, a new destiny. At the clearing where it all began, the local government installed a small wooden bench with a bronze plaque that read, "In honor of silent courage. Here, a life didn't end. Here, a family began." Pinewood Valley was no longer the same. The story of the baby saved by a stray dog moved the entire country. A state law was passed to strengthen protections for vulnerable children, and awareness campaigns sprang up, led by a woman no one used to notice, Margaret Foster. The former cat lady now ran a foundation called Hope and Paws, dedicated to helping women in need and rescuing abandoned animals. "If a dog could save a life with just instinct, we can do so much more with purpose," she said firmly in every interview. Sarah Coleman, Richard Bennett's former assistant, testified against him and left the corporate world. She now worked as an accountant at a community library, far from the glamour but with a clean conscience. Detective Laura Mitchell, recognized for her flawless investigation, was promoted. Her office held a framed photo, Max lying at the foot of the baby's crib, surrounded by wires, lights, and hope. And Richard Bennett, the man who thought he controlled the world, was sentenced to 12 years in prison. His name no longer meant prestige. In the cold cell where his story replayed endlessly, he learned that power can't bury the truth forever. Meanwhile, in a modest house with a garden on the outskirts of town, a new story blossomed. Emily Harper nursed her daughter Grace, while Max, the four-legged hero, slept at their feet. Grace was already babbling words, and every time she laughed, Max wagged his tail. Their days were simple but full: park walks, picnics on the grass, nights of stories and soft barks. Emily painted vibrant canvases, sold her work at craft fairs, and recently published a book titled The Furry Guardian, The Story That Changed My Life. Part of the proceeds went to Margaret's foundation. The rest was saved for Grace's future. One April morning, Emily took Grace and Max to the clearing where it all began. They sat on the bench by the plaque. Grace pointed at butterflies, Max sniffed the flowers, and Emily, with tears in her eyes, whispered, "This is where I thought I'd lost everything, but it's where life gave me so much more." Max rested his head on Emily's lap, calm, at peace. as if he understood, because sometimes true miracles don't fall from the sky. Sometimes they walk among us quietly with scars and a heart stronger than fate. Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.